Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive Saturday edition. We're going to give you the weekly intel brief, something I know a lot of people are looking forward to because they don't get a chance to watch every show and they don't want to miss any of the important things that we pass along during the day, during the week. And boy, this was been a very powerful, packed week. A lot of things have been going on. A lot of things are up in the air right now as we speak. And then there's a bunch of stuff probably just over the horizon that probably next week is going to be probably quite monumental in Middle Eastern history, and depending on how things go, world history, we'll see how that goes comes to pass. But first of all, I want to start off with the Russia-Ukraine war, because that's something that doesn't get as much notoriety and observation these days because of everything that's going on in the Middle East. But there's still a lot happening there too. And we had Larry Johnson on this week, and I asked him a really important question during the show. What is the search situation right now, given the condition and the fact that this in the past couple of months, Zelensky has come to the United States, first to Washington during the NATO conference, and he wanted to get NATO membership, a guarantee and approval for that. You know, at least something, you know, a mark on the wall that says here's when it's going to come or something like that. Got more ammunition and weapons, left empty-handed. Then he came back just a couple of weeks ago for the United Nations. Then he went to New York, and he wanted to get, again, some concrete offers of long-range weapons, the permission to use into the Russian side. He wanted to get more air defense missiles, etc. He left not entirely empty-handed. He did get a promise of $8 billion more of stuff, but he did not get permission to use the long-range weapons, and he did not get any mention even of any future NATO membership. There's a reason for that. And believe me, those messages were heard quite clearly in Moscow, who were watching very closely, because on the battlefield, things are continuing to deteriorate for the Ukraine side. So I asked Larry, what is the end game here? What is the end state? What is it that Russia is willing to do now? Because they had tried in December of 2021 to avoid war altogether by having an offer for negotiated settlement, which was rejected by Jens Stoltenberg. Then, and shortly after the war started, there was nearly an agreement in Istanbul in April 2022. That was rejected as well. This past June, Putin made another offer for a negotiated settlement on progressively worse terms for Kiev than before. And then they made that incursion into Kursk region, and that was taken off the table. Therefore, I said, where are we now? And what is going to be the plan at this point? Here's what Larry said.
Unconditional surrender by Ukraine. It'll be a military surrender. The army will be disbanded. They're not going to be allowed to remain intact, and they'll be compelled to force all NATO personnel out of the country. And if NATO forces dare to intervene, Russia will hit them. They're not going to play now from this point on, because the murder of Nasrallah, that's not just isolated to the Middle East. That resonates up in Russia. It's had an effect in Russia, because they're sitting there looking, going, these damn Westerners, you can't trust a word they say. They are murderers. They blame us for killing women and children when they are killing 10 times the number of women and children. They're supplying the bombs to do it, and they don't care. They don't care.
So that's a pretty stark statement right there. And in fact, most in the West will say, surrender. What are you talking about? No, there's no way that Ukraine is going to surrender. But is that a strong statement? Is that an over-the-top statement, or is it close to reality? Let me show you just a real quick on the map here. Probably part of why Larry was making that statement. Now, first of all, we're going to start off in the north up here in the Kursk incursion. Now, we've been watching this from the beginning. Back on August 6th is when this first happened, made huge news. Does this look a whole lot different from that? It does look a little bit different, because the Ukraine side had gone all the way out to here. So all of this territory here has now been retaken by Russia. And you see they continue to make incursions into here. And you see these penetrations, they keep pointing further into here. It's pretty clear that Russia is trying to just cut this off at the neck. And instead of worrying about trying to battle for each of these individual villages and areas back here, to cut off Russia here so that they can't support and supply these troops up here. And then you don't even have to fight them. Either they're going to have to withdraw, or they'll simply run out of ammunition and weapons, and they'll be done, or they'll have to surrender, withdraw back into the country, or surrender outright. That's the situation they're in right now. And Russia is clearly in no hurry to get this done. because to do that faster would require them to divert more troops, which they clearly aren't doing because they have them engaged elsewhere. And let's take a look at elsewhere. So obviously this stuff north of Kharkiv, this continues on. This has been going on for months, just kind of skirmishes back and forth. All this does is chew up resources and ammunition and logistics really from both sides, but it's not going anywhere. But it does prevent Ukraine from pulling these troops off and fighting them anywhere else. So they have to keep this stuff alive, just like they have to keep the situation up here alive and all the resources that go into that, all of which prevents them from fighting down here on the Eastern Front where it's more important. And, and we continue to have more incursions and look up in here in the Kupiansk area. I've been watching this too, this penetration that's been going on. It's pretty clear that in several different places here on the Eastern Front, Russia has prioritized certain areas, this being one of them, the Pishani area, and they're moving up to cut across the Oskol River, which is right about this area here. And you see they just keep making methodical progress, and now they're almost right up to the river itself, and it's not going to be much longer before they're able to block that. And when you cut that off, and especially the supply road that you can see here, that'll affect their ability to continue fighting here and here. So Russia is on this path where they're trying to just cut the Ukraine side into manageable bites and then chewing up the parts in between instead of having just sort of this big across the board attack. Then we move down here into the Toretsk area, another area we've been talking, and there's been more progress here as well. Let's see if I can pull that one in the right place up. Yeah, here we are. So you see, we've been talking about this, and you see they just continue to make methodical progress up into the city, up into the citadel here, but they're also making a progress on the flank in this southern part of the Toretsk agglomeration. And it's just putting the whole Ukraine force at more and more risk, and they just can't stop it. Then you get further back into the Pokrovsk area. This has been one of the bigger ones, and you see now Pokrovsk is completely under fire control from the Russian side. It's all within range of all of their weapon systems now, drones, artillery, and certainly rockets and glide bombs. And that is continuing to get hammered. But they continue to progress on the ground as well. One of the other areas I keep showing you, remember we were talking about the city of Ukrainsk and the coal mines. That's long been moved over, and now then they're all the way up here. This area here continues to shrink for the Ukraine side, but you see that the Russians, again, instead of going after directly and fighting here, they're starting to move in the flanks to cut this area off. So instead of taking every city and every field by force, they're moving on some of the bigger areas and then trying to flank them and cut them off to force the Ukraine side into either giving up, withdrawing, or dying in place, which is actually what happened in Vuhledar. And that's the other area we're talking about down here. You see that pretty much is what happened. Now Vuhledar is totally gone. Russia continues to make progress, and now they're moving up to the next major city here. And you see, you can also notice, let me back up a little bit. You can see all these yellow things are defensive lines. Many of these are ones that the Ukraine side had built all the way back to 2014, and they have now been passed. And you just don't see as many on the other side of these lines. So there's a lot fewer on this whole area than there was on this area. So there's not much further Russia has to go. And then all of a sudden, it's going to be less and less difficult for them to move through. So the bottom line is you continue to see that the Russian side is just making really methodical progress that just can't be stopped. So then you have to get to the question and to the point of, and then what? You hear me say that a lot because that's supposed to be a fundamental of any strategist, of any tactical operations. Okay, I'm going to take action A, the enemy's likely to take action B, and then what? And if you don't have an answer for and then what, you don't have the resources for it, then that's when you get into the position to where you may lose. And that's where I think Ukraine is right now. I don't see any military possibility for them to even maintain what they have, to have this so-called frozen conflict, to have a stalemate, which so many in the West seem to want to have. I don't see them having the potential even to maintain a stalemate. They're only going to continue to lose further and further to the West. And as things heat up in the Middle East, that could have a real effect on what happens here as well. I'm going to talk about the Middle East in the next segment here. But to point out that even without that diversion, there's no path for Ukraine to win. There's no victory plan. There's not going to be any forcing Russia into coming to any kind of a negotiated settlement that's to the benefit of Kiev. There's none of that. Just understand it. I'm telling you the truth here. Now, I know a lot of people want to give all kinds of claims to the contrary, and I see headlines every day about how all these bad things are happening for Russia and Ukraine still. It's a lie. It's just untrue, or it's bad analysis. Pick whatever one you want. The bottom line is there's no path, and the longer we delay, the more Ukrainians die and the more territory they're going to lose. But it's not isolated. There is something else going on in the Middle East, and I want to take a look at that. One of the biggest problems right now is that the United States could potentially get sucked into a war. And I don't mean supporting the Israeli side. I mean getting sucked into the war. And some of those things are already starting to happen. So we had Ambassador Chaz Freeman, former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, knows the region like nobody else. We asked him about what was going on, and we asked him, hey, so what is the prospect and what is the possibilities of us getting drawn into this war, and what is your views on that? Here's what he had to say.
Netanyahu saw October 7th as an opportunity to go for broke, to get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza. And under cover of that, with the world's attention on Gaza, to carry out the further ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, and now to go after Hezbollah. And his objective all along has been to embroil the United States in a war with Iran, which Israel couldn't win on its own. But with American help, he believes he could establish Israel's regional hegemony and maybe even produce regime change in Iran. Your new Iranian president is about as moderate and reasonable as you can get, but even he has been driven to retaliation. And I'm just shocked that people do not seem to understand. Iran launched a limited attack on Israel, and it called it off after an hour. And it said, we will not do anything else unless we are attacked. This was a clear signal Iran does not want a wider war. It does not want a war with the United States. It does not want a war with Israel. And yet Netanyahu seems to be hell-bent on getting his region-wide war with the United States backing Israel. And he may succeed. He's been after this for a year. He may now succeed.
And we certainly hope that doesn't come to pass. But as I've told you, there's already 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups in the region. And just actually overnight, we seem to have gotten a little bit more involved here. U.S. and U.K. bombs have continued to pound targets in Yemen in support of the Israeli war. Understand what that means. That means we are directly engaging and striking enemy targets on behalf of Israel. And as I've told you already previously, or actually as the U.S. government admitted recently, in that last barrage of 181 missiles that were fired at Israel, U.S. Missile destroyers knocked down 12 of those missiles, and that we actually engaged. So we even took place in that one, not to mention the 70 some odd that we took down in the April Iranian attack. The next one, though, could be much more difficult. And that is one of the problems that we have, is that the further you go in here, the more you have the possibility of attacking into Iran. Now, attacking into Yemen is one thing, because they have very limited military capacity, and they're already pretty much maximally trying to do what they can. So there's the temptation to think that's a limited situation. That's not going to get us into anything, any real problems, and that's not going to cost us anything. Don't carry that logic into Iran, because that is a completely different matter. Our troops are far, far more vulnerable. The ones throughout the Middle East are far more vulnerable to that potential, because Iran can do harm to us. They have a potential. They have anti-ship cruise missiles, which could potentially damage or even sink some of our ships in the region. Certainly if they get within range. The Iranians are limited in range, but they do have that capacity. But the far bigger problem is that our troops scattered throughout Iraq and Syria, and in Jordan especially, are extremely vulnerable. And if we get into a war with Iran, if we start attacking targets in Iran, then they will probably not withhold their fire against us, as they have so far. So we should not be getting into this war. But instead, it looks like we're getting closer. Now, President Biden was asked yesterday about, hey, what do you think about us getting into this war? What should we get into the war, and what are you doing to stop it? watch what he says here. And one of the things that concerns me is that the impression that he comes off giving here. Tell me, does this sound like the guy who shapes global events?
Last night you said that there's still a lot to do to avoid an all-out war in the Middle East. I mean, firstly, aren't we pretty close to that definition already? And secondly, what can you really do to stop that happening?
There's a lot we are doing. The main thing we can do is try to rally the rest of the world and our allies into participating like the French are in Lebanon and other places to tamp this down. And but when you have proxies as irrational as Hezbollah and the Houthis, and it's a hard thing to determine.
So yeah, he literally didn't even answer the question. He's just, you see, he's talking these really soft tones, and his speech is kind of like this, and he's halted. You see all of that stuff. And that's, so just the impression and the image alone does not give confidence that this is somebody who's going to keep America out of a war. In fact, it looks more like he could get us stumbled into war by lack of action. And can you imagine Netanyahu? And I've shown him many times on here. Do you see how emphatic and firm and stern he is in his declarations in all kinds of manner like that? And do you think that he's going to be put off by President Biden? I mean, I think the answer is pretty clear. But in that same press briefing, they went a little bit further. One of the other reporters asked another more pointed question.
What are you advising the Israelis to do in terms of their retaliation to Iran? And at this point, you still haven't spoken to Netanyahu. Is it fair to say that you have little personal influence over what he decides to do?
No. Look, our teams are in contact 12 hours a day. They're constantly in contact. I've already had my presidential daily brief. We've already had interface between our military, the diplomats. It's in constant contact. They are trying to figure out, and this is high holidays as well. They're not going to make a decision immediately. And so we're going to wait to see when they want to talk.
But over the past few months, they've consistently defied your administration's own advice. So do you believe that the Israelis are going to listen to the advice you're giving them?
What I know is the plan that I put together received the support of the UN Security Council, the vast majority of our allies around the world, as a way to bring this to an end. Look, the Israelis have every right to respond to the vicious attacks on them, not just from the Iranians, but from everyone from Hezbollah to Houthis anyway. And but the fact is that they have to be very much more careful about dealing with civilian casualties.
So how should they respond? You expressed concerns about attacks on Iranian oil facilities. How should they respond?
That's between me and them.
Okay, is it though? Is it between you and them? Because it looks to me like it's just between them. I mean, I can't overstate this enough. You got to really look at what he's saying here. They ask him pointedly, what are you going to do? What if Israel strikes these targets here, especially if a nuclear one's here? Are you going to be able to restrain them? And he didn't even answer the question. And now that's not shocking for a politician, but I think it looks pretty clear in here that he doesn't even remember what the question was. That's a true statement. I mean, he starts talking here, first of all, well, they're in the middle of a high holiday period, so they're not going to make a decision. Hey, folks, this isn't like Walmart or something like, hey, maybe they're going to be closed, on the Christmas holiday. We'll get back later. I mean, you're talking about war and peace issues here. Of course, the holidays are irrelevant to their war-making decisions. But to even say that is like, wait, did he just say that? I had to watch it a couple of times to see, did I hear that correctly? You did. He did say that. Then all of a sudden he's talking about whether or not we should whether he's going to be able to defend the United States' interests, and can you restrain them? Because she said, look, they've been kind of defying you. They haven't been listening. Why do we think it's going to be different now? And what is his answer? He comes back and says something about, well, my plan at the UN Security Council was endorsed by a bunch of people. That's not even related to what she's talking about. He's talking about a ceasefire plan that he had before. We're not asking about a ceasefire plan. That's obviously something that happened prior to all of this, these missile strikes going back and forth. This is something that's about right now. And who cares about whether you had anyone else's approval here? This is about American leadership. This is about just the president of the United States. Is he in a position to shape global events? And can he restrain Netanyahu? And you see over and over that he's talking in these aspirational languages, almost like a kid who's talking to his buddies, and they say, "Hey, do you think you can get the car, to go out cruising this weekend?" He's like, "Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm going to ask for it, but that's what it looks like. It looks like a child to a parent, and it's supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to be the other way around." But listen, folks, whatever Biden may say, we are really getting close to the potential for an all-out major escalation here. And look, I mean, Israel, this is in today's news. Israel has confirmed that they are preparing significant retaliatory strikes against Iran's missile barrage. And you can quibble about whether it's going to be a nuclear site, which we showed you Jack Keane and Lindsey Graham and General Kellogg, a bunch of other people have been arguing for, and they think, yeah, it's a great idea, or whether he, quote, just goes after the Iranian oil infrastructure, et cetera. But listen, the Iranians are not sitting passive either. The Ayatollah Khomeini gave a very unusual, first time in 4 years, he made a public speech on the Friday prayers, and he emphasized that they are still interested in peace. They still want to be responsible, but he said, but if something else happens, we will appropriately respond to that. That was yesterday. Now, today, the Iranian foreign minister comes out and says that if struck, we will have a stronger retaliation against Israel. But the deputy IRGC commander went a little bit further, and he, quote, echoed the sentiments and warned that Iran would target all of Israel's energy sources, stations, refining, and gas fields. Israel has 3 power plants and several refineries, and we can attack them at the same time. Fadavi was quoted by Iran's semi-official news agency saying on Friday. So you have Israel talking about maybe we should go after their nuclear infrastructure, but whatever it is, it's going to be something significant and painful. They keep using that, and severe. These are the adjectives that they're using about it, and they're declaring today again that they're going to do that. And as I've mentioned previously, it's virtually certain, and I'm convinced that before Iran gave the authorization to launch that last barrage of 180 missiles, that they were probably already mentally prepared for the next wave. And they probably were already preparing for that, resourcing it, coming up with targeting plans, et cetera, because I think they knew that based on the past year, that Israel was going to do something. In fact, I think they were always very clear that Israel has been trying to bait them into a strike so that they could launch a war against Iran from the beginning. I think it's been self-evident. I don't think they've been any concerned about this, but it does appear that Israel finally crossed the line, that now then Iran doesn't care. And they say, you want a war? Fine, we'll give you a war, but don't think it's going to be cost-free. And I still think that the evidence shows that Netanyahu wants to draw the United States in here. And listen, I think already they're over their skis, the Israelis are. But by continuing this war in the Gaza Strip, which still is not over and still is continuing to this day. There was attacks in there this morning, I think. More people are getting killed. They still get killed there every day. There's strikes there. There's strikes in the West Bank. That's continuing to go on. At the same time, now then they've started this full-scale incursion into southern Lebanon. They're still hitting them with large numbers of airstrikes throughout the country. Beirut got hit again overnight. Over 2,000 people in Lebanon have thus far been killed. The IDF reports that at least 250 Hezbollah fighters are part of that casualty. But so you see that the vast majority, are innocent civilians throughout the country, and that seems to be consistent here. But listen, they have set themselves a goal. And I was on a television station earlier today on News Nation, and they showed a map that Israel has said this is where they have ordered the Lebanese civilians to evacuate, because they're going to come through and clear out all the Hezbollah people that they encounter in there. That's 60 kilometers deep in a 125 kilometers wide zone of some of the most difficult terrain you can imagine. Now, we don't have any idea how many casualties Israel has been suffering so far. They've admitted a few, but I can tell you from some certain knowledge of operating in terrain very similar to that in that part of the world, that is a very, very difficult task militarily that they have set for themselves. And nobody better be thinking this is going to be a short situation, probably measured in a half a year increments, possibly more, probably more. And I frankly don't know how Israel can sustain combat that long. So if we're only talking about the Palestinian-ish areas in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank and in this situation with Lebanon, that is already, I think, more than Israel can handle politically, economically, and manpower-wise. I just don't know how they can sustain that over such an amount of time without somebody else helping them on the ground. Because if they try to do it themselves, they're going to crater their economy. And then how do they, if you don't have an economy, you can't sustain a war effort. And now then, on top of that, they are, by all accounts, prepared to launch a new strike into Iran. Now, if they can't handle these things without substantial help from the Americans, what do you think is going to happen there? Just imagine this. Play this with me here. Okay, so this is Saturday, October the 5th. Now, the anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attack is coming up just 2 days hence. Now, I personally think that the chances are probably quite high that Israel is going to wait to launch its attack until 7 October. So I'm wagering that probably in the early morning hours of the 7th, when it's still dark, Israel is probably going to launch. If they're going to launch sometime soon, it only makes sense to wait on that day so they get the symbolic value for their people to say, hey, here's our retaliation for what happened last year. We'll see if that happens. It doesn't matter if it does or not on that day. When it happens, though, you're going to see probably substantial damage done to the Iranian side. They apparently have some good air defense capabilities. Israel may lose some jets in the process because they've got to get pretty close to launch some of their missiles. That remains to be seen as well. But whatever they do, for sure, some of it's going to get through. If Netanyahu is good to his word, he's going to hit something significant, and there's going to be significant damage done to the Iranian side. And then I think they're already mentally prepared. They're not going to wonder, they're going to, or wait. I think that they're going to launch an attack on timing of their own, that they're going to hit some of those targets that IRGC leader just mentioned. Now imagine what is going to be the result in the Western press. Like all these other ones that have happened so far, every time they get talked about in the Western press, they never mention the antecedent. They talk about what Iran did in April. They never mentioned that was in response to Iran destroying an embassy compound, which is supposed to be protected under international law. They assassinated leaders in there by wiping the building off the face of the earth, literally collapsed it into a pile of rubble. No one much mentioned that. Then this last one that can appear, that again, I've even seen some people use the term unprovoked. No mention of the fact that was preceded by the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on a presidential inauguration time, and then the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, their big proxy in Lebanon. No mention of any of those things. And Iran retaliated for both of those. Now then, if Israel makes this big attack and hits Iran, when Iran makes its response attack, it's going to, I bet, we'll see how it works out, that most of the Western media will characterize this as, see, I told you, those Iranians are you just can't trust them. They're hell-bent on destroying Iran and Israel, and now then we've got to come to their help. And that is, I think, what Netanyahu's plan has been all along. Again, we'll see how it plays out, but I think very strongly that we are right on the brink of being drawn into a war. And let me explain something to you here. This is not something that is going to be limited to strikes, that you're going to be able to hit here and you're going to be able to hit there, and then you can watch from a distance or from our aircraft carriers, and then that'll be it. Iran has cards to play. We have enormous strategic vulnerability in that area with all of our troops in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, elsewhere in the Middle East. We are under real serious constraints here. Iran has also threatened that if the barrage continues, that they may hit other allied forces to the United States oil infrastructure. They say if our oil infrastructure gets taken out, all of y'all are going down. We're not just going to go quietly into the night. Why would we want to play with any of that gargantuan fire? Everything exists right now. Iran still says they're willing to have a negotiated settlement. They're willing to restrain themselves. They've shown that up to this point. even at least before the assassination, I haven't seen any current stuff, but the Hezbollah, the survivors, had been saying that they are still willing to have a negotiated settlement. There was some commentary from some of the Iranians and some of the Arab leaders in the region that they say they still want a region-wide ceasefire, and they're willing to do it so long as that also includes the Palestinians and now the Lebanese. So if everyone agrees to let the guns go silent, peace can still, or at least stability. Let me correct myself there. I don't want to say peace, but stability and the absence of warfare can be attained. It is on the table for the taking. There is one person that doesn't want it, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu. He wants his war because he wants to militarily conquer everybody so that he has to give up nothing, has to make no compromise. And that's the very heart of diplomacy. You have to be able to give something that the other side wants in order to get something that you want. So it's a give and take kind of situation, has been through human history. That's just how things work if you want a stable environment. And only someone who's just hell-bent on military conquest ignores all that and says, no, I want to give nothing. I want to gain everything, and so I'm going to use military power to get it. Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have the capacity to make good on that threat. He thinks unless he gets America. But I'm telling you, even if he gets America, he will not conquer that because we don't have the capacity to do it. Just imagine, again, let's play this out. Let's go 3 and 4 levels deep here. If Israel strikes, Iran counterstrikes here. Obviously, Israel, if they get harmed and then really harmed, and not just a symbolic strike like the last 2 from Iran had been, but actually devastates their energy infrastructure and those specific targets that Iran talked about here, it would be devastating to Israel. They obviously would then go full on in response then. And so it keeps going on. Now then the U.S. gets drawn in, because there's been so many says Israel's too small. They're just a small little country. They can't stand up to all this barrage. We have to go in and fight with them. And let's say now then that we end up giving into that. What do you think is going to happen next? Is Iran going to be defeated in the war? Are we going to invade Iran? Or are we going to keep using more missile strikes back and forth? What do you think is going to happen with that? Look at Yemen. Ask the Yemenis who Saudi Arabia for a decade tried to bomb into the Stone Age. They never did. They're still fighting to this day. And I mean, you can nearly look at anyone else. Look at the Hamas, for crying out loud. They're not even a state actor. They were hermetically sealed in the Gaza Strip, and they're still able to resist and still able to fight. Now, how much more so this massive country of Iran? If we start trying to bomb them and use missile strikes, it's not going to make them quit. Unless you go in on the ground and take control of their political centers and eliminate their leadership and take control of it, then they're going to continue to exist as a political entity. That's just the facts. It should be elementary. That's not hard to figure out. That's what it takes. So if you can't go to that 4th phase and forward and resource it, then do not go to phase 1. Don't take the first step. Again, this should be logical. And let me just confirm to you, we can't, not shouldn't, we can't go to that 4th phase and beyond. We don't have the resources for it. We don't have the military capacity to do it. We dang sure don't have the political will in the United States to like form and mobilize this huge army to go into Iran and to engage in what would certainly be a multi-year operation there. With then, even if you succeeded, would require occupying the place for some number of years after. There's no appetite for that in America at all. Any party, nobody is going to be signing on for that. But even more poignant, we don't have the ammunition for it. We don't have the missiles. We don't have the artillery shells. We don't have the personnel. We don't have the equipment that you would need to do that. And by the way, they are shooting back too. So they're going to start attacking our troops now, especially if it gets into all out war. All the stops are off. Nobody's going to withhold anything. Every target they can hit and every American they can kill, they'll do it. And now then they can, as we've talked about a bunch, in the worst case scenario, when it gets into this full-on war, they have no more motivation to hold anything back. Strait of Hormuz is going to get shut down. And now then the global economy is wrecked, because the price of oil will go through the roof, because you have this massive amount of it being now shut off in an instant. strategic reserves that we and some other places have are not going to come close to solving that problem. You don't have enough. You'll bleed that dry in no time at all. And some places don't have any. And every economic output that there is requires an uninterrupted flow of sufficient quantities at an affordable price of oil. And if that gets gashed, then everything else goes through the roof. And our economy is already weakened and it's kind of shaky. Now, we had some great numbers the past week that the current administration is celebrating. And I'm telling you, if you want those numbers to continue, and if you want them to pave the way for the next 4 weeks or so until that election, do not get into a war here. If only you care about the election, that's what we ought to be focusing on, keeping this thing out of war. So no matter what you think it may do and make some of the Israeli supporters in America unhappy, not suggest to Benjamin Netanyahu, do not launch this attack against Iran. Don't do it. And I think that Biden should now publicly, apparently behind the scenes, negotiations are no longer working. Biden talked at length about all of his people that are talking to the Israeli people, obviously to no effect, and it's irrelevant. So now I think that he should publicly say, it is not in America's interest for this to escalate. We are going to now elevate diplomacy, and we're going to work with all of the regional partners, to include Israel, to include even Iran, and some of our other Arab partners in the region who are willing to work for peace. And we're gonna put a full court press on that. The war hasn't worked, fighting hasn't worked. We're gonna try something else. We do not support a war. We will not support one. That's what the President of the United States ought to be saying today. That's what America needs to do. That has a chance to succeed. That is an attainable political objective at the lowest possible cost. And it's not even being tried. And that's what needs to change. And listen, in the last section I've got here, let's look at what happens next, because so many people are banking on the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow system, this multi-layered air defense system for Israel. They're thinking, Iran doesn't have that, so we'll be protected. Not so. And all these claims, and I've seen it, I saw it on the news earlier today. People are still saying, but the Iron Dome system still worked and knocked down most of those missiles. But Ted Postal says, you might want to rethink that.
The result of this initial shock to Hezbollah of killing off a large part of its command structure has clearly not had the effect that the Israelis were hoping for. And my guess is that the most experienced Israelis who are not nuts, and there are a lot of those who are not nuts. I mean, I have friends in Israel who I talk to, and they're not nuts, and they're reasonable people, and they are ethical. They just can't control the situation. The ones who are not nuts have predicted that Hezbollah would not collapse, because this is an organization built from the ground up. And you get young soldiers who, from the time they were maybe 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, have been training to fight against the Israelis, have known nothing in their life except attacks, killing people who they love and know. They're not going to say, oh, my leader has been killed. Those Israelis are coming across the border. I'm not going to fight. That's ridiculous. Of course they're going to fight. And as long as they're trained in close combat tactics, which it appears they are, they're going to do well. You're a soldier. You know why you train your soldiers, so that when they're isolated, they can still fight.
Right.
And that's what you're looking at.
Now, that was one clip where he was talking about that the idea that you can bomb Hezbollah into submission. And he said, that's ridiculous. You're not going to be able to do that. In the full episode, which obviously I don't have the time to play right now, I'm going to put it in the well, actually, I don't even have to. Just go to our YouTube page, the Daniel Davis Deep Dive YouTube page, and you'll see it. It's from yesterday. Terrific analysis piece and forensics about what actually happened. Turn into that and watch it, because that will eliminate any doubt anybody has, because you have tangible evidence to show that this system does not work anywhere near what is being claimed. And I assure you, Israel is very, very vulnerable to even some more effective and capable Iranian capabilities. And watch in that clip, especially from Ted Postal in that show, rather, he goes on this once and says, if I asked him what was the most dangerous course of action that Iran could do that Israel is the least prepared to defend against. And he went on and said, here's what I would do. It's in the latter half of it. and he talks about how the Iranian side could start with large waves of Shahed drones and several other kinds of drones that, even though they're slow, they all have to be attacked with interceptor missiles, which could be anywhere from $100,000 to some of the Iron Dome to up to two to 4 million, depending on some of the higher interceptor missiles that they have. And then they just come in waves and waves, and then those are followed with some of the more capable ballistic and cruise missiles that Iran has that have great accuracy. He said Israel just can't handle those. There's too many of them, and they'll get through. So if anybody thinks that Israel is free to launch a bunch of missiles and that Iran will have them shot down if they come back in, is setting themselves up for a real disappointment. And I hope that the president of the United States isn't one of those who thinks that, because it's not true. Listen, appreciate you guys being with us today. I know it's a Saturday, but always a value you guys coming on. Be sure and like and subscribe. And we've got some great folks coming up. Have George Galloway from the UK has agreed to be on the show next week. Doug McGregor is going to be back. Larry Johnson, Suleiman Ahmed, whom I'm on in some of his X Spaces. We're finally got him to come on our show. I'm really excited about having him on for the first time. And I assure you, if my fear is right, that on the early morning hours of 7 October, there is an attack, I can assure you we will be there to give you everything that's happening, and we will keep you appraised. And thank you very much for watching Daniel Davis Deep Dive.